All right. Hello, travelers. Welcome to Reach the World. For over 20 years, Reach the World has used virtual exchange to inspire youth to become curious, confident global citizens. My name is Tim, and as part of Reach the World's efforts to support educators and families during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're sharing free live stream discussions with some of our standout travelers from recent years. You can find an updated calendar of live stream events and much more at athome.reachtheworld.org. Today, I'm excited to be connecting again with Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship recipient, Gerard Avelino. Gerard shared his experiences abroad in Paris, France, through a recent Reach the World virtual exchange. And I am so happy to welcome him back to talk some more about his time in France and what he's been up to since. If you haven't already read Gerard's virtual exchange articles from France, I'd highly recommend them. There's a link to his event page on athome.reachtheworld.org. And we'll also share a link to his journey homepage in the YouTube chat sidebar. And if you are joining us today as part of our live stream audience, we really hope that you'll let us know you're here and share any questions you have for Gerard in the in the chat sidebar. And we'll be sure to pass them along to Gerard and see if we can get you an answer. That said, it's time for us to go on a journey to France, and welcome, Gerard.
Hi.
Hey, welcome. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk to you about my journey in France and, get everybody to know like what it's like living there, what it's like studying there, being in a new country and, exploring all these new things.
Can we start by just sort of talking about what your journey was to the point where you were studying and living in France? What got you interested in traveling to France and studying there and spending some time? And what sort of got this ball rolling?
Yeah, it was. I ended up going to France in kind of a roundabout way. So when I started at community college, and when I was there, that's where I discovered that I really liked learning languages. I really liked learning about all these other cultures, and that's where I started learning French. I took French for a year there, and then when I transferred to Cal State Fullerton, and I started majoring both in linguistics and French, and all these classes of just talking about, oh, this is how it is in France, here's how you say things, here's what the food is like, what the culture is like. All of that was just kind of this big teaser, and I was just thinking, wow, it would be great if I actually found a way for me to go to France and to live there for a while and maybe actually apply what I learned, learn more of the language, and yeah, I guess I got to make that happen. So I just really thought that going to France would be really important for me to develop those skills of not just speaking French, because I don't think you can even learn a language all that well unless you're in the place where they speak it. So there was that, but there's also, I wanted to know, what would it be like to live independently on my own in this new place where I'd be surrounded all day by new things, new experiences. And yeah, that's definitely why I decided to do that. And I mean, it was lucky that at my school at Cal State Fullerton, we had a partnership with MISEFA, which is the exchange program between France and the United States. And I was able to apply to that. And yeah, with the help of some scholarships, particularly the Benjamin A. Gilman Scholarship, I was able to fund that trip, and it's such a life-changing experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Awesome. Can you you have, just for everyone's context, you have had that amazing experience in France, and I know you spent some time there, and now you're back in California.
Yes.
And getting ready to move on to other things, which we'll touch on before we sign off today. But if you can remember back, what was it like your first week in France? What is it like to sort of arrive in a new country and find your way?
Honestly, it was a bit terrifying. The moment you land in the airport in France, you're already surrounded by everything French. And it's completely different from learning in a classroom, learning when you're actually living there. So that's what something that was something that really worried me. I thought, oh my gosh, what if I get here and nobody's going to understand me? And I'm going to be like fumbling through all these situations and not knowing what to do. And in the end, I don't think it was. I should have worried about that too much, because not only did I have the support of my program, I also had the support of my classmates and all the other Americans who were there with me on the trip. I also had the support of my French classmates who were there, because they were also very interested in learning about me and my culture. So when I was there that first week, it was a challenge. It was a challenge, having to figure out how do I register for classes in French in this new French university system that I'm not familiar with. How do I take public transport? Where do I get my card to get onto the metro? Um, all these things were just little issues that I had to deal with. I had to make sure that I had to get through it, because this was something that I had to do for the entire year, and it worked out because I had all that great support from all the community that surrounded me.
Yeah, let me ask you, just to take a step back. We had a good question from Matt in the live chat bar. He was asking if everybody in France speaks French, or if there are other languages, or as you're sort of acclimating, it's sort of an easing in process, or did you just have to go French 100% of the time?
Yeah. Um, so in Paris, most everybody speaks French. You'll hear French everywhere. For me particularly, um, I didn't have to plunge myself into French immediately, because I did have a lot of people around me who spoke English, and the people who gave us our orientation programs, all the people who made sure that we were well adjusted, they did speak English. And even then, if we had to interact with people in French, we didn't need something too deep. We didn't need too much a high level of French. We could get along with get by with our with what basic French we knew back in the beginning. So that wasn't too bad. Um, so yeah, in France, in Paris in particular, French is the primary mode of communication. Everybody speaks French. But it's a very big city, a very, very big city, and there's people from all over the world. So you would have no problems finding people to speak English with. There's always people who speak other languages like Spanish, like Arabic. So many different communities in Paris that, you know, if you speak another language, there's always going to be an opportunity to practice, even if it's not just French.
Yeah, absolutely. The language question is one thing that lots of people find intimidating when they go abroad. Like, how am I going to be able to communicate with other people? And there's another good question in the sidebar from Benjamin, who is asking if French students learn English in their schools.
That's a really good question. They do, in fact, learn English in school. From what I remember, they have a choice of languages when they go through high school, and a lot of them choose English. A lot of them also choose Spanish, or what else I think they've gotten the choice to learn Chinese or Arabic, but most of them try to learn English, because it's such an important language these days to make sure that you connect with as many people as possible. So yeah, a lot of them already do speak English in, well, not in a native way. I would say a lot of them could speak it in a native way. Um, Sometimes it might be a bit difficult to understand some accents, but all you have to do is just train your ear. Just listen a lot better. Learn what differences there are in communication. But
Cool.
it wasn't difficult to find people who did speak English, especially because there's a lot of American media that's popular out there, like movies and TV shows and books. So Yeah, a lot of French people are good at English.
I know you said when you first started answering this question as it relates to Alexa had a good question in the chat as to whether or not you were scared when you first arrived. And you said it was a little bit terrifying, but I think things like the language may have been part of the reason you put yourself in that situation in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like I had already taken like 2 or 3 years of French by the time I went to Paris, and I thought I was already hitting a wall with my learning. I thought, okay, I can't really practice my language just here in California because there really aren't many people who speak French here. So I decided to go to Paris precisely because I wanted to learn more French. So even if it was really scary, that was a step that I had to go through to get to that next level of learning the language.
Sure. Can you think of any other ways in which you sort of stepped out of your comfort zone as part of this study abroad experience, and what may have learned from that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I did when I was in Paris was I had to sign up for a language exchange, um, like a little language exchange community, because I had a class where I had to basically write a diary about how language exchange communities work, and so I had to find one. And in basically in our weekly meetings, we would have half of our meeting in French and half of our meeting in English.
Hmm.
That would mean I would be teaching the French people how to speak English in a more natural way, and they'd be teaching me how to speak French in a more natural way. And that threw me for a loop in the beginning because when they were speaking, they looked to me for my expertise on English. But when you're a native speaker of something, of a language, sometimes it's really difficult to explain why things are the way they are because you didn't really exactly learn it formally, right, growing up. And that's something that I had to kind of real like step back a bit and think, okay, I learned about all of this stuff in linguistics class. Let me try to make this accessible, make it easier for somebody to understand how the language works without, scaring them away with technical language. That was something that was interesting, I think. Um, I mean, the fact that I had to go to class and take all these classes in French was also really intimidating because I already took a lot of linguistics classes here at home in English, and then I had to go there, and suddenly everything was in French, and all the vocabulary words that I learned in my classes that had to do with linguistics, I now had to think about it in French, and
Yeah.
that was really cool and really, but it was intimidating at the same time because all the students in class, they were all French people, and I felt like if I made a mistake with what I was saying, if I had to answer a question in class, all eyes are on me, and I didn't want to mess up. But then when you're learning, messing up sometimes is the right thing to do because then you would learn from your mistakes, and I learned a lot from my mistakes.
Yeah, oh, that's such a good point. It takes making some mistakes to improve, and studying abroad and being in a place that's totally foreign to you is a great time to do it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
We have just a lot of great student questions in the chat bar,
Oh
so I'm
my
going to sort
gosh.
of let the students dictate some of the direction we go with this call. I have a lot of questions for
Sure.
you, but I want to pass along some of the things that they're asking you. Um, Let me scroll up a little bit here. All right, so Lysandra had a great question. She wanted to know, what's your favorite place to go in France, or what was one of the highlights of your time there, something you saw or did?
uh let's see, there's so many good things that I did and went to in France that it's hard to pick just one. um so yeah, when you're in Paris, you have the Eiffel Tower, you have the Arc de Triomphe, you have the beautiful River Seine, but you have all these big touristy attractions. But I think my favorite place to just be was the botanical gardens in Paris. It was called the Jardin des Plantes. in English that literally just says Garden of Plants. But it was near where I went to school, so sometimes I would just hang out in there, just walk around, and especially in the springtime, it's just full of all these different flowers and fruiting trees and little bees all around, and it just felt like a really relaxing place to be. And it was somewhere that you could also observe how French people were in their day-to-day life, because you would just sit there while you were while reading a book or anything, and you'd see families running around and playing. You'd see um, couples holding hands walking through the garden, and also next to this garden there's also a little zoo, so you could also look in there and see various different animals, and it was just really a really cool place to hang out and just chill for a while, especially if if when I was stressed out about certain projects or classes, I would just go there for a while and just relax for a bit and enjoy nature, because no matter what season it was, even if it was the winter and there were no leaves on the trees and it was really cold, it was still a nice place to just sit down and you know be one with nature and be one with the people of Paris, and just sitting there and just yeah, that was I have lots of good memories about the botanical garden.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a beautiful place. Did you have when you were sort of out and about in Paris? We had a great question from Eban, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but here she asked, "What are the popular things to do in France? What do you observe? Some of the things people doing, maybe something that's you found to be different than maybe the way people would typically spend their time in the U.S."
One thing that Parisians love to do is they love going to cafes or restaurants and sitting outside on little outside tables and just sitting there and having a little chat. And meal times in France, they can be serious business. You have your three courses, and you can start. You have they usually like eating at certain times of the day, and they don't eat outside of those times of the day. It's really interesting how serious mealtime is for them, because not only do they eat really good French food, but it's also a time for them to reconnect with their friends and their families. So they sit out there, and a meal, sometimes here in America, a meal could just take 30 minutes, an hour, but there it could last all night. You start with your appetizer, your your beverages in the late afternoon, and then just end up talking all the way to late at night. And that's something that the French people really love. They love to enjoy their food with good company, and that's something that I really want to take away from there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I brings about a point that's brought up in the chat. Frenesi is asking whether or not France right now is also sort of on lockdown as part of the COVID-19 pandemic, what you might know about that, and how I would assume that that impacts this culture of cafe sitting
Yeah,
and slow dining.
that's a great question. Right now, France in general is on lockdown thanks to COVID-19. Um, I have a friend right now who lives in Paris, and he actually just started a school program the other right in the beginning of March, right before everything started locking down. So in the first couple of weeks, he had to go into school and the normal way, go there, go into a classroom and learn. But right after everything started locking down, he's had to basically stay at home and do school over Zoom and do all these projects online instead of in class. And it's really disruptive. Everything has to change to make sure that we all, stay safe. And that's what they're doing there. They've cut down a lot on their public transport. They're closing shops that aren't essential. And if you have to go out to buy food or anything that you do need to buy, you have to have a permit and make sure that if If a policeman stops you and says, "Hey, you're not supposed to be outside. Where are you going?" You have to show them the permit and say, "Yeah, I have to go buy food today. This is my day when I can go buy food." So yeah, it's a lot of change from day to day life, because usually in Paris, the metro, all the buses, they're packed, and because it's a really crowded city. But right now, from what I heard, it's surprisingly empty, because Paris is one of the biggest. It's the biggest tourist destination in the world, so it's always full of people. But right now, it's very calm. Everybody's staying at home, making sure they're safe.
Mm. Well, yeah, it's important to note that COVID-19 is affecting people everywhere, and really interesting to hear the perspective of your friend. And thankfully, you've had a chance to sort of hear and help us answer that question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thinking towards like the days when you were in Paris, and I think your talk about cafes has gotten several people in the chat bar
Well,
interested in the cuisine of France and Paris, which is sort of world renowned. Did you have
absolutely.
any? Did you have any favorite dishes, or if you could sort of
Ooh.
transport back in time and be on the streets of Paris right now, what would you go in search of for lunch?
One thing that I missed the most, I guess, from Paris, that I could just get anywhere when I was there, is um, I don't know if there's even a specific word for it. But when I would go to one of those, like the botanical gardens, like I said earlier, they would have little food stalls here and there, and I would always get a savory crepe. So you'd have a crepe, which is basically a really flat pancake, and they would fill it with ham and eggs and cheese. And it's such a really simple thing, but I feel like the French have absolutely perfected the art of making a simple ham, egg, and cheese crepe. And it's so portable. They would give it to you in a little in some paper napkins, and you could just eat it while walking around. And the simplicity of it just kind of that was the best part of it, I think. Like you would
Mm.
have a lot of complex, delicious French recipes like boeuf bourguignon, which is a beef stew made with the red wine sauce. You could have something like you have a lot of different fancy desserts. Um, I think I do have a picture in my, let's see. Yeah, I have a picture about some really fancy stuff. Let me see if I could share
Yeah,
my
of course.
PowerPoint screen. Let's see. There we go.
Well,
Is that
looks
showing
great.
up?
Yeah, looks
Yeah.
great.
So we have all these. They have all these different pastries in the top left. Can I maximize this? Probably. Yeah. There we go. In the top left, you have a bunch of different pies and cakes. You have like meringue pies. You have something called a tarte tatin, which is apple slices. Like it's like an apple pie, but beyond apple pie. And the lower left, you see all the different macarons, all with different flavors. France is very well known for their cheese. I love trying all the different cheeses they had there. Very, very different flavors. You have some that are kind of sharp. You have some that are really creamy. You have some that look really moldy on the outside, but are really firm and delicious on the inside. And they also have a very rich tradition of meat pastries, like these ones on the lower right. You have all these different pates and cured meats that are surrounded in some sort of pastry. All that was just really, really good.
Yeah,
Uh,
wow, you're making me hungry.
yeah, it's about lunchtime for me right now. Like, I
There's some interest in the chat as to whether or not you had a chance to try escargot.
I actually did. I did try escargot. Um, so in Paris, you can find escargot in any of the restaurants there. You just ask for it, and they would serve it to you in a little plate with like like it looks like a painter's palette. You know how they have how painters have that little thing with the dots of paint around. It looked kind of like that, and there were like little little round areas where there was like individual snails, and they were usually coated in like a creamy, buttery, garlicky sauce. It was okay. I wouldn't say it was the best thing in the world. The sauce was great, but I didn't really like the texture of the snail.
Yeah.
It was a bit chewy and gummy, and you know, French people love that, but I think I would have to get used to it to enjoy it more.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing your experience. I hope everyone in the chat gets a chance to try it for themselves at some point.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you never know if you might like it. It's definitely worth trying.
Hmm.
I wondered, somebody in the chat asked what the hotels were like, and I think the essence of their question was, where did you stay? Yeah, I assume you were not
Where did I
staying in a
say?
hotel. Where do you stay when you live in Paris?
For the first couple of weeks when I was there, luckily I do have a friend who lives in Paris, and I was able to just kind of crash on his couch for a while. But when I needed to find a permanent place to stay, my program helped me get into a student residence, which is basically this building in Paris where everybody who lives there is university students.
Mhm.
I actually also have a picture of my room. Um, right before I moved in, it was the tiniest apartment. It was a studio with, oh man, it was really small. Let me,
Yeah,
because
while you're
in
looking it
Paris,
up, I just want to add, Gerard posted so many great photos as part of his virtual exchange, and they're all still available online at
yes,
reachtheworld.org. There's a link to Gerard's journey at home.reachtheworld.org in his event page for today. So make sure you check out Gerard's virtual journey. There's so much more to explore.
lots of great stuff. So yeah, I think I'm sharing the photo of my apartment right when I moved in. That's it. Everything you see there, that's it. That's the apartment. So I have like the tiniest kitchen. The kitchen sink couldn't even fit an entire plate in it. Um, yeah, and I had a big window outside, and you just see the building facing you. Um, but this is what students usually did have when they live in Paris, because it's a big city. It's very crowded. It's very hard to find a lot of space to move into. So even having a spot like this is really convenient. It's really I was very lucky to get this spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was very close to the metro. Oh, I'll talk about that later. Um, but yeah, it was very close to public transport. I could just go outside and cross the street, and I'd be on the tram, and I could go literally anywhere in Paris. So I think that was one of the things that I loved the most about this place is that even if it was a tiny apartment and it had hardly any space for anything, it was very close to everything else that I wanted to access.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't think I actually I'll let you go a little bit more into this. The topic of transportation is always so interesting. How did you get around in Paris? If
Mm,
you wanted to go to class or wanted to go to a museum or a park, how would you get there?
right. I love public transport in Paris. It's one of my absolute favorite. I love public transport anywhere, but Paris has a really good public transport system. So if I wanted to go to class, I'd just go outside and cross the street, and there's the station. The station for it's called the RER, which is the Regional Express trains, and that would take me to class in like 10 minutes max. So I would just get in the train and hop in and hop off a couple stops later. And if I wanted to go anywhere else within Paris, I could take the subway, which is they call the metro, or I could take tramways, which are surrounding Paris, which is basically like a subway but above ground. I think I also have photos of that.
Cool. For our New Yorkers on the chat or in the audience today, is this sort of comparable to subway? Oh, I see. It's above ground.
Yeah, the one on the right is the tramway, and that one is above ground. On the left, that's me inside a subway train that is underground. Um, I took that photo because there was nobody else in the train with me, which was very, very rare. I think this might have been late at night, but it's usually very, very packed. Yeah,
Cool.
I love trains so much. It's
Yeah,
not something that you get a lot here in Southern California.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're sort of running low on time, and we've had such a
Oh my
great
gosh, yeah.
online discussion, so many great questions. And before we get to our last question today, I just want to emphasize to everyone who's joining us today that we're going to have a chance to connect with Gerard again. We're going to talk to him again in a few weeks. And in the couple weeks between now and then, you should really check out the link that my colleague Chris just shared in the chat to Gerard's virtual journey. There's so much you can learn. I think it's going to generate a lot more questions for Gerard, and we can have a really great conversation about culture and life and Gerard's time in France. We've had one of our chat members really wants to know about sports in France. Are there any sports in particular
Yes.
that you saw a lot of?
In France, soccer is very, very popular. It's one of the most popular sports they have there. It's actually, they don't call it soccer in France. Literally only America calls it soccer. In France, they call it football. And yeah, it's huge. I remember when I was in Paris for the first time, actually a few years before that, it was also the time for the Europe Cup. And if you could imagine the Eiffel Tower, they decorated it with a giant soccer ball right in the middle of it. So I thought, wow, I could finally see the Eiffel Tower, but there's this huge soccer ball inside. So I thought, I have to go see the Eiffel Tower again one day when the soccer ball isn't in it. And so I moved to France for a year. Yeah, soccer is very important. And I actually did have a chance to try sport there because interestingly enough, I had a few people who lived in the apartments, and they, in a little getting to know each other kind of session, they realized, oh, you're American. Do you know anything about American football? I said no. I had known nothing about any sport at all. And they said, oh, why don't you come and try to join our American football team? And so I went and did the first day kind of exercises and trying things out, and it wasn't for me in the end. But it was really good to know that they wanted me to be a part of their team and try it out, and as an American see how it's like to play American football in France. So that was a bit surreal, but it was pretty fun.
Wow, cool. What a great experience that must have been. Unfortunately, we are already over time for today. I
Oh my gosh.
absolutely love talking to you. I can't believe we just barely touched on the Eiffel Tower. We haven't talked
Oh my
about
gosh, I
any of the
know.
museums in Paris yet. We have so much we have left to talk about.
That just went by so quickly.
And I'm really, really excited to keep this conversation going again in a couple of weeks. Once again,
Yes,
I want to
absolutely.
encourage our live stream audience today to please check out Gerard's virtual exchange. He is with us in part because he did such an amazing job of sharing that experience in the moment. And it's going to be just as impactful for you now. So be sure to check it out. I hope you come up with some more questions for Gerard. We'll get back in touch with him again really soon. I want to thank you, Gerard. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. Yeah, that was so quick, and I wish we had more time for all these great questions. But yeah, do come back in a couple of weeks. We'll have another meeting.
Cool. We'll be back. We'll post the event on the athome.reachtheworld.org website. I hope everybody who joined us today will also join us for any one of our exciting live stream events left to go this week and into next week. Such a great stream of things coming up. You can find the complete listing of upcoming Reach the World events at athome.reachtheworld.org. And with that, we'll say goodbye, Gerard. See you next time. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.